Hey ARKS Ops! Some time ago, the Deus Esca Urgent Quest was added to PSO2 Global, and with it came a whole new set of rare drops, a challenging rematch with a limited number of deaths allowed, and several trigger parties dedicated to squeezing every bit of content out of the boss. In the last few weeks, I've encountered plenty of players who have had trouble with this very powerful but very predictable boss. So, I wanted to go over both encounters to give our fellow ARKs the edge in battle against the new god of vengeance that is Deus Esca. I know this may be rather late coming, especially since the Deus Esca rare boost ended on the 23rd and with episode 5 just a week or so away. But this urgent quest will probably be around for some time, and I'd like to have this resource available for our newer players and our veteran players all the same. For the record, let's go over some basic information. Deus Esca has 2 battles within the same scheduled urgent quest, with the first being Deus Esca, Maker of New Epochs, and it is challengeable at the normal set of difficulties, from normal to extremely hard. This takes place during the first 30 minutes of the scheduled urgent quest. The second, however, is Deus Esca, Singer of Genesis, which is a much harder version of the fight that is only accessible by characters who have cleared the Maker of Epochs part on extremely hard, and also runs during the second 30 minutes of the scheduled time period. It also requires a class level of 80 and a subclass of 80, so make sure you run the Maker of Epochs encounter on your 80-80 character if you have one, as the entry is only permitted for the same character that cleared the first half, not alternate characters on the same account. This boss hits pretty hard, I'm not gonna lie to you, it can really mess you up if you're not ready for it. But it is ultimately very restricted by his patterns, and once you're aware of them, he becomes extremely easy to predict and react to. While squishier classes with less defense and HP may still suffer from occasional one-hit KOs, especially in Singer of Genesis, knowing what attacks are coming and being able to predict the boss's actions will go a long way in defeating him. So, with that said, let's get into it. Starting with Maker of Epochs, the encounter is broken down into roughly about 3 main parts, with the last part having a series of sub-phases. In the first part of this encounter, you'll be fighting Deus Hyunas, who appears immediately at a lower point in the tree just as the mission starts. Deus Hyunas has 5 major attack patterns that you need to keep an eye out for, but before we get into that, let's go over a general briefing of what you need to know about these attack patterns. All but one of Deus Hyunas' attacks are multi-targeting, and they require you to watch for specific tells or signals to avoid or counter them. This kinda goes for a number of the boss fights in this encounter, but sticking with Deus Hyunas, be sure to keep an eye out for the battlefield and be conscious of what is going on around you while you are fighting him, as you are ultimately responsible for your own well-being after all. With that disclaimer out of the way, the first attack pattern is his most basic, where he attempts a series of quick melee attacks to the front. These are often made towards a target player, so if you are not the target, it is as simple as attacking him from the back or the sides. Although sometimes his swings can be a bit wide, so be careful when going for the side. If you are a target, I'd recommend moving back and dodging a bit, but keep from going side to side too much, as you want to allow your party to attack him while he's distracted by you. The second attack pattern is a whirlwind attack that will pulse a few times immediately in the area surrounding the boss. This attack can and will knock players back and deal a moderate sum of damage. To avoid this, watch out for when he lowers his hand. The field pulses around him, because when he raises his hand, the whirlwind will activate and will pulse 3 times before subsiding. This move in particular is rather dangerous to melee combatants who may not see this in the middle of all the flashing effects that are going on in front of the boss. Next, Deus Hyunas will occasionally target players around the field with a spike from below, which comes very shortly after a few pulsings of light blue energy on the ground near the targeted player. Last but not least, Deus Hyunas will telegraph his most dangerous attack when his halo enlarges and he shines more than usual. He's a very shiny boy. A lightning storm will begin to shower the battlefield, targeting players, and you will have to move from side to side to avoid being struck. If you are, they will stun you. Just shortly afterwards, however, a series of spinning tree spikes will erupt from the boss and spin across the battlefield, ultimately circling Deus Hyunas and potentially doing quite a bit of damage to melee combatants or anyone who's caught unaware by this, as they can strike multiple times for each spinning tree spike. Now, for what it's worth, Deus Hyunas technically has more attacks than these 4 patterns, but generally speaking, these are the ones you will almost always see, especially in 12-man parties where they are knocking them down very quickly. From what we've seen in the JP version, and sometimes in the NA version, it's very hard to get footage of this, he also has a few abilities where he sends a small shockwave of branches that he launches with his sword, a long-range wave attack that kind of makes a cone directly ahead of him, and a few homing seed projectiles. These attacks are not often used, they're very infrequent in Maker of Epochs, just because of how quickly most parties DPS him down extremely hard. So don't worry about them too much, just keep dodging, keep moving, and you should be fine. As long as you're keeping an eye out on the battlefield while engaging Deus Hyunas, he's not that much of a hard time. You should have no problem moving on to the transition point to the next phase of the battle. During this transition, you'll be climbing the Yggdrasil and encounter several angelic enemies of 3 varieties: S. Opsis, S. Anges, and S. Centaurus. Most of these enemies aren't very notable, and a party of 12 will easily DPS through them. S. Opsis will fly about shooting you like a little cherub as he is. S. Anges attacks with dives and occasionally fires lasers of its own. And S. Centaurus will fire beams and cast magic from their staves. Of these 3 angelic enemies, the S. Centaurus is probably the most dangerous, as they tend to have more health and can very easily catch foolhardy players who charge in unaware in a vacuum attack that can go off close to simultaneously from each S. Centaurus, dealing quite a lot of damage at one time. If you have trouble with them, they have a weak point on their staff that you can use to try and DPS them down pretty quickly. After defeating 3 waves of these enemies, you'll transition to a new place through a white fog. Don't worry, it happens to everybody, where you have dash panels set up and they require you to run up the roots of Yggdrasil to confront Deus Esca. During this segment, just avoid any of the indicators that you see flash before you and you should be fine. You're given a pretty good bit of notice when and where an obstacle will appear, and if you're struck by one, you'll need to find another dash panel to continue. That said, you can actually jump through a couple of these obstacles as long as you get the windows just right, and sneaky, of course, as long as any one multi-party member makes it to the top, you'll all be teleported to the next part. But you didn't hear that from me. In part 2 of the fight with Deus Esca atop the World Tree, you will face off against Deus Anges, a more powerful form of Deus Hyunas. In this form, he largely has some of the same moves, but they are a bit stronger. He also does use his seed projectile attack here a lot more, and he'll be more aggressive with his tree spikes, which are telegraphed by light blue marks on the ground. His whirlwind attack now has 2 different variants. The first is a short-range burst, just like before, directly surrounding him, which will damage players adjacent to it and knock them back. However, the other is a much wider range burst that has a hollow, unaffected area directly adjacent to the boss. In this second variant, melee fighters can opt to stay inside the donut hole, so to speak, and continue dealing damage to Deus Anges. The biggest new attack is when Deus Anges leaves the field and teleports into the center of the area. Shortly after, the ground will be covered in blue veins, indicating the direction and area of effect for his oncoming wave attack. In order to avoid it, you'll need to look for areas that are not covered on either the left or right or front or back of the field, sometimes both. You will cover some ground to find one of these pockets most likely. It's very hard to avoid this attack if you can't find one, but hopefully you'll manage to duck into one and be safe. After the attack, he'll begin preparing another wave in the opposite direction. Just move to the opposite side of the field looking for a similar pocket, usually on the same side. If you can't avoid it, players with invulnerability skills for their dodges can attempt to dodge through the waves with some amount of precision, but it is very difficult and the wave can hurt a bit, so play it safe if you're not sure. When Deus Anges falls, we move to the final part of this encounter, where he transforms into Deus Esca Zephirot, a giant version of the boss with several dragon head appendages. Before getting into the breakdown of the main phases where you fight the dragon heads to progress, please note that Deus Esca Zephirot will occasionally retract the dragon heads to perform an attack himself in one of many ways, oftentimes with faster speed and more damage as the phases go on. These are a list of general attacks that he can use at any time throughout any of these phases for the most part. They oftentimes, again, get stronger as the phases go on, and they can get a little bit faster in some of their executions, so be careful and be on the lookout for them. One of his attacks will be that he will sweep his large blade across the arena, which will hit the entire field and you'll need to dodge through it. He can also stab his sword into the area that you're in, make a series of cuts in the shape of a letter N, we call it the pizza cutting, followed by a brief set of explosions. Also, he can punch into the arena, which will be followed by a few erupting spikes thereafter, and he can scrape his head across the field, generating lightning waves. Finally, he will occasionally cause 2 sets of zigzag patterns of tree spikes to erupt from the ground, which you can avoid by standing either between the glowing area marking them, or just getting out of the area in general. In the first phase, you'll need to defeat 3 of the dragon head appendages before you can get a crack at the main body's core. This tends to be the mechanic that will mark the beginning and end of phases as you go up and strike the core. The dragon heads themselves will fight back against you by lunging or stabbing into the ground, sometimes firing a slow-moving bubble or a line of lightning, but usually fight independently from the main body aside from a few lightning waves that the main body will summon here or there. Your goal is to damage the dragon heads until they all become covered by a sort of thorny barrier. Once covered, the individual dragon head will be immune to damage, so you'll need to change your targets. Once they're all covered, they will begin to charge up a small bubble in the mouths of each dragon, with Deus Esca Zephirot making a small speech about how he is changing the world. You'll need to DPS these bubbles down in order to provide a pathway up the boss's core on one of the dragon's necks, where you're free to go ham at it with your strongest abilities until you and your party are knocked back. As soon as you land, I need to stress this, you need to start moving in either the left or right directions, as Deus Esca Zephirot's main body will begin charging a one-hit KO attack with a very large area of effect in the form of a gigantic spirit bomb that will split the arena in 2. In my personal experience, too many players die to this attack as they are caught buffing, healing, or simply think they can dodge it or guard it. I don't know. It destroys the land underneath your feet. Those guarding iframes and perfect counters, I don't think they're going to save you this time around. Getting back to the phases, the second phase sees you fighting on the left or right because of the giant spirit bomb that just blew apart the middle part of the arena. Depending on which direction you went, you can either be on the left or right and be fighting with your party or alone. Usually, parties will attempt to discuss plans about splitting, but generally speaking it's okay because as soon as you work through these dragons and you go up to the core and blow it up on one side, you'll be put on the other side with the other team that may still be struggling, or they might be right behind you. I have seen actually a couple of cases where so much damage was done when the left side got done, that when the right side finally managed to work down the dragons and blow up the bubbles with the help of the left side, the boss immediately moved into the second phase and there was no attacking his core. Ultimately, you're still dealing with the dragon mechanic where you defeat all the dragons, get their thorny basket head, defeat the bubble that they start coughing up, and then climb up the dragon's neck to destroy the core. As long as you do that, you'll be moving to the phase 3 in no time. Phase 3 is when we start seeing all players move to another central part of the arena, and Deus Esca Zephirot now powering up and showing us his wings. This is when things start getting interesting, and no dragon heads are around this time, and you're dealing with the main body exclusively. In this phase, he has a few new attacks added to his general pool that I mentioned before. In these moves, he will either perform a 1-2 combo of smashes and punches into your arena, which can stun you and deal heavy damage if you're hit, as well as summon a wide spike after each impact. When he does this, immediately after, he will lay there for a moment exposing his core to attack for a while pulling back. For this reason, I recommend trying to position yourself on the right side of his impact so that you can get to his core easier, as his fist and arm will actually block ranged attacks and techs. In addition to this, he can occasionally spin his halo in the background, which will cause large beams of light to rain down on the players. Generally speaking, Zephirot will rotate between any of these new attacks or his general pool of attacks with a very slow wave attack where he first scorches the outer ring of the arena with fire, and then eventually sweeps a set of lightning waves across the inner ring of the field, which progress outwards. During this attack, his core is exposed the entire time, so try to move with it and focus it down while avoiding the attack. Personally, I like to chase the core on the inside first, and then move to the outside, and once he starts passing by with the lightning, go between the lightning or dodge through it. Also, just as a heads up, Deus Esca Zephirot's core is usually active all throughout this phase and is a weak point, but it is usually obstructed by his crossed arms when he's raised up and not near the platform. That means rangers with a keen aim during his attacks, or the precision blight rounds ring, or Summoners who manage to get a lock on can continue to attack the core even when it isn't exposed or down near the ground. If enough damage is done, he can be stunned, which will cause him to fall over and give you more of a window to attack the core. Once enough damage is done, we reach the final phase, which I like to call the final countdown. Deus Esca Zephirot will align his rings towards the moon and fire a large beam that breaks up part of the moon and threatens to fall to Earth. You will now have 5 minutes to finish this quest, or it will immediately fail, so you have no opportunity for dawdling. This phase will open with all of the dragon heads returning for the final time, and with a new attack. When all the heads rear up on each side of the arena and hang for a moment, they're preparing for a very explosive pincer attack that can deal some heavy damage. Try your best to either dodge or block it as they come crashing down, and then proceed to attack and decapitate one set of heads preferably. The reason I say preferably is because it gives you a safe area if the next set of heads tries to do this again. It's a very highly damaging attack, especially towards more squishy players, so it's always good to play it safe. Once the dragon heads are dealt with, the main body will come down to fight you again with almost all of the same attacks as from the last phase. However, note that they're often more powerful and are much faster, such as with his sword swipe being much faster, starting much faster, and being faster in general, and now having a thrust follow-up. And his sword smash now has a great overhead strike that accompanies the end of it, which looks very impressive but is easily avoided. Keep on him as he exposes his core during his double wave attack that he was doing in the last phase. He does it now too. And he should eventually become stunned for a prolonged period of 30 seconds. Once this happens and he starts to fall over and you hear that he's on his last legs, you need to pile in for everything you've got. If you do not, he will get up and he will attack with a sword sweep that will instantly kill everyone. GG no re. With that, you will have finally beaten Deus Esca, hopefully. Maybe he didn't kill you with his large swords attack of Ultimate Doom, but hopefully you managed to triumph over him and everything is well. If you're wondering about the Deus Esca rematch, it is the extremely hard one that I mentioned before, where you have to have 80-80 on your character class. It requires 4 people to fight the last part of the battle with Deus Esca Zephirot by themselves without the aid of a multi-party. For the most part, the battle is mostly the same. Almost every single thing plays out exactly the same way, all the phases, all the attacks. The only thing you have to note is that he kind of has a damage resist of about half on him, 50% damage reduction, and his health is much lower than normal, so it's a challenge, but it's not that bad. One thing to be aware of when fighting Deus Esca Gracia in the Singer of Genesis mode is that he tends to hit a lot harder with most of his attacks. This is important because your party can only die 4 times. If they die a 5th time, it is over, and you will need to try it again, provided the time period is still going. That said, as mentioned before, Deus Esca Gracia is not different at all from Deus Esca Zephirot, other than the damage reduction and the more damage. So, as long as you keep the same strategies in mind, you should triumph over him easily. And that's it. We are officially at the end of the video. I appreciate it to all of those who have watched this far. I want to give a shout out to everyone in the Affirm Guild, Darth Malice, Deathernax, Cloud, Sheila Draco, everyone, Matt, Space Windu, everyone who helped me out with recording this. You can see them in multiple clips, as well as a number of public group members who also helped me out with this. It was wonderful farming with everyone, especially while we were looking for Rappy Eggs and Rickrow Staffs before the rare boost ended. In any case, guys, I really hope this helps you out at all. If you happen upon this in the future, you're newer to the game, or you're having some trouble with the guy, I really hope this lays some stuff out for you that makes sense and you can use this to your advantage. I'm going to sign off, guys. This is Silhouette. May you have all the rare drops.